Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk. And, we were all chatting a little bit before the show started about how much news there is going on in the world. We have a presidential candidate who's now under a second indictment. And, that's a scary thing. Listen, I don't like Trump. I've made that clear. But, boy, I'm also a little skeeved out at the idea of indicting people who are running for president. But on the other hand, I kind of think he deserves it too. He did it. Apparently, this latest one, CNN, he's on tape saying it. So, and nobody should be above the law. Anyway, we're not really going to start about talking about that. In North Dakota specifically, there are two big stories in North Dakota politics. One, Doug Burgum's running for president, and we're going to get to that. In fact, we're going to talk with somebody who used to work for Doug Burgum, Sean Cleary, currently a state senator. That's going to be in the second part of the show. To lead off, we're going to talk about the other big story in North Dakota politics, which had some bearing on the first one, which is that the North Dakota Republican Party is in the process of reorganizing. Now, for those of you who don't really follow this process, and I can't imagine that's many of you who listen to this nerdy podcast, but just in case some of you don't know how all this works, essentially every cycle the party has to, both political parties, but essentially they go through what's called a reorganization process, and it starts at the district level. And there are elections to choose people who are going to be, for instance, the chairman of the local district Republican Party. So if you're going to be the chairman of the District 5 Republicans, there's a process for that. There's an election, and as well as the other positions within that district, like the executive committee and things like that. And then as each of those reorganizations are handled at the local level, they then send their district chairs to the state level. They all sit on what's called the state committee, along with the NDGOP's executive committee, and they hold an election for leadership positions like party chairman, like the national committee members. So that's what's happening now. This has been happening all over the state. Now, also, people who've been listening to this podcast know and reading my columns know that the NDGOP has a civil war of sorts going on between, and I always run into a nomenclature problem here, but I refer to them as the Bastiat Caucus, or the very, very Trumpy people, or the culture warriors, the populists. It's hard because none of those labels fit perfectly, but I feel like as I'm talking about it, we all kind of know what we're talking about. And of course, on the other side are the people I like to call the normies, who are maybe more in the traditional Republican mold. Next week, and this is interesting because, and this is where it has a bearing on Governor Burgum running for president. Governor Burgum's out there trying to sort of eschew the culture war, saying that's the culture wars are issues for the states. I want the federal government to focus on the economy and national security and things like that. And honestly, I find that to be a very appealing message. But as he's making it, his party could be taken over by culture warriors. And here to talk with us about that, of course, my co-host making a glorious return to the podcast, Chad Oban.
I cannot believe you didn't have some music like Don't Call It a Comeback by LL Cool J, something like that. But again, I worry about your servers, Rob, with me.
We have bolstered them.
Bandwidth.
We have bolstered the servers. I'm hoping that we're going to be able to withstand the Oban bump.
I bring at least a dozen listeners when I co-host this thing. At least, literally 1 dozen. I was going to say dozens, but not plural.
You have enough room for that, Rob.
Well,
you have enough room for all that Chad brings.
The voice that you're hearing now is Bob Harms, who is a veteran of North Dakota politics, served in the Schafer administration, served in the Hoban administration, has been chairman of the North Dakota Republican Party in the past, has served other positions within the Republican Party. He's here to talk with us a little bit about what's going on in the party. And Bob, first of all, let's start. Did I lay out everything fairly in terms of what's going on in the party? What's your view, I guess?
Yeah, I think so. I think there are some factions. You're right. One label doesn't accurately or precisely describe the factions within the party, but I think there's two or three that you described. I think that's fair. And that there's a debate going on inside the party for sort of control. And I think that's where the problem lies. And you and I have talked a little bit about how do you fix that? And is this an unhealthy thing that's going on, or is it politics and the kind of thing that we should embrace? How does that all work out in the long term?
Well, tell us. I mean, is this healthy, what's happening? I mean, because on one hand, you want to say that competition within the party is healthy, right? It's a marketplace of ideas. It's an arena, and we should be having debates, and we should be talking about it. The party shouldn't be static. It should be dynamic. I agree with all that. Yeah. What worries me are some of the motivations for certain factions and some of their objectives. To me, are out of line with what I view as conservatism and republicanism.
Well, I agree with that, and you and I have talked about this before. Here's my take on it. I think debate on the political front is something we should embrace. We should foster it. We should give everybody the opportunity to express their ideas and refine our thinking. We get a better product as a result. The problem that we end up having, and this is going on around North Dakota in Republican circles, is gamesmanship, and it's gamesmanship mostly at the district level. And it's on both the right and on the left. And it mostly those who are in power, whether you're conservative or you're left to the center, those who are in power play games at the district level to maintain power. And then by that gamesmanship that they play, they have created a chasm within the local districts where the people on the outside, I don't care if you're Republican or you're conservative or liberal, the people on the outside are angry because somebody didn't tell them about the dues had to be paid 6 months before the district meeting, or you had to have a blue shirt on before you could vote in the district meeting, or you had to be a precinct committeeman in order to vote. You couldn't just vote because you showed up, all of that stuff. Or you're a district Republican card-carrying member in District 37, and you can't get a copy of the bylaws because the district chairman doesn't want to give them to you because he knows that you're on the other side. That's where the problem lies, and we need to fix that. At the state level, the state committee should fix that, requires some uniform bylaws, make sure that they're all published online, available at headquarters. I mean, I called 2 different district chairs within the last several months, a former state party chairman. Couldn't get a copy of the bylaws in 2 districts I was interested in because I heard about them. But the district chair said, I'm going to give them to you.
So Bob, I think you're such an interesting guest to talk about this because you have been establishment, right? I mean, you've worked in a couple of governor's offices, you've been the chairman of the party, but you also are open to having conversations with people who aren't part of the establishment. I think that's one of the things that, I mean, you said at the outset, the best product we get is by listening to everybody. And I think you actually live up to that, which is unique in this environment. So I appreciate that. But one of the things I struggle with is some of the internal stuff about, getting bylaws and that kind of thing is one thing. But what do the Bastiat, the MAGA Republicans, and what do they ultimately want here? I've seen some of the stuff from Sandi Sanford that she sent to legislators on book banning and some of these other social issues. But what is the ultimate goal? To take over the GOP for what?
Well, that is it. And that goes back to Rob's opening, and that is that there are people within the party who are very passionate about pick a topic. And Rob called them culture warriors. I think that title describes that adequately. So there's that faction. There's a faction that I would probably be more in sync with, and that would be the fiscal conservatives, that we're spending too much money, that we should take care of the legacy fund. You have that faction. So I think to answer your question, Chad, I think that's what they want to do. They're passionate about abortion, LGBTQ, book banning, all of those things. And that stuff, I was on the phone a couple of months ago, diehard Republican farmer, very, very successful. And he's just shaking his head. He says, Robert, I don't understand. They are up there and they are not doing anything that my family, my farm, my business cares one whit about.
Right.
And that's a challenge. And so here's another. So I think the state committee should fix rules that require all of the districts to have uniform bylaws, that they're published, that everybody knows what the rules are. They know what the dues are paid, when they have to be paid. That's one thing that they should do. The other thing I think the state committee should do is they should have state rules that require or allow for punishing, if you will, districts that don't play by state party rules. There's a view that the state party can't do anything, that they've got a district committee that doesn't want to play by the rules that the state party has. And I disagree with that completely. I wouldn't seat them. I wouldn't recognize their delegates in the state convention, but I'd have some rules at the state level that say, you're part of the Republican Party and we're going to play by these rules. Now, having said that, it sounds kind of dictatorial, but all I'm saying is the rules should be fair. We should know what they are, and they should foster and welcome debate. Sometimes people don't know what they don't know. Chad, back to your point. Yeah, I get somebody's really passionate about a particular social issue. I understand that, but that's one issue. Let's talk about nursing home expenses or healthcare. What are we going to do with property taxes? Or are we doing everything that we should be doing on K-12? Those are things that people care about. Or economic development. Where are we going with economic development in North Dakota? Do you want 2 million people living in North Dakota? I don't.
I think there's two issues here, and one issue is the rules issue, which I think is ideologically agnostic. It doesn't really have to do with it. It is shocking to me that the NDGOP doesn't have a set like just a standard set of bylaws that govern how a district chair is selected and who gets to vote in that process and everything else. Come up with a rule, apply it evenly across the state, and that's it. But we have, you were mentioning some shenanigans. I know District 3 here in Minot, last cycle, there was a situation where you had, in order to vote in District 3, you had to be a dues paying member the previous year. The problem is that was straddling a redistricting. There were people who didn't live, and not even redistricting. Like, there were people who moved into District 3. Like, they moved across town in Minot, and now they're in District 3, but now they can't participate because they weren't a dues-paying member last year. Or they just decided, hey, I want to get involved in Republican politics this year. Oh, but I don't get to vote because I wasn't a dues-paying member last year. Those are shenanigans. In District 40 in Minot, we saw. I reported on the censure of State Senator Karen Krebsbach. She was censured for quote-unquote being a Democrat by a charge led by a district chair who was elected at a meeting with 35 people. Now gets to censure a woman who's been winning elections for Republicans since the Reagan administration and say that she's a Democrat. She doesn't. But they also attempted, and they failed at it, but they attempted the other night a rule change that would have made it so that people who were censured by the district's executive committee couldn't seek the district's endorsement to run for office. Now, for a movement that's all about, we the people and they're populists and everything, but now we're going to make it so a small committee of people can dictate to the rest of the legislative district who can and cannot seek the convention endorsement. Now, of course, whoever wants to be, they can run on the June primary. That's a different matter entirely. But it's just, to me, that's one of the, to your point, that's one of the big problems the party is facing is there has got to be a uniform set of rules. It's got to be transparent. Some of these district chairs, and it's not all necessarily from one faction, but there's a lot from one faction. Yeah. This is a problem. You want to talk about a good old boys club or a corrupt system, a rigged system, all they're talking about, they're rigging it. They're rigging it, and that's a problem for Republicans. People who are showing up and wanting to participate, this is what they're running into. Why would they want to participate in a party like this?
No, you're exactly right. And they're rigging it based upon who's in power. I mean, whether you're a newbie and you've acquired power and you're playing games then, or you're a status quo and you have power and you're going to keep the newbies out. But that gamesmanship should come to an end. And this election that's coming up at the state level, that's a big deal. And I don't know if either of the two candidates that declared candidates have got their arms around
Is Sandi
that.
Sanford declared? Is she in officially? Okay.
Yeah, she's in. Yeah. So she and Perrie Schafer are going to compete for it. There might be one other candidate. Maybe I'm hearing that. But I think they need to have this conversation that we're having right now internally so that we don't have that gamesmanship. I'm really of two minds. On the one hand, we should have all kinds of debate and noise and all kinds of arguments and ideas and foster all of that. Welcome all the newcomers, and I'm all right with that. But we also have to have rules so they all play by the same rules, what we're talking about here this morning.
I think often we forget that political parties are private organizations. And I think we've talked about this in the past, Bob. I mean, when the state century code dictates what a private organization can and cannot do, that can create problems. I mean, we saw last session, a bunch of people who were mad at the state party went to the legislature to try to change the law for the private organization they're members of. I want to try to bridge the two subjects that are Rob brought forward a little bit at the beginning here. Do you think it's a problem for Doug Burgum's presidential campaign if Sandi Sanford, who, I mean, I've seen some of the stuff she said about Doug Burgum, it's not positive, becomes chair?
And by the way, Sandi Sanford, wife of former Lieutenant Governor Brent Sanford. We haven't mentioned that for people who maybe don't know that. Sandy is the wife of Doug Burgum's former Lieutenant Governor.
And the RNC committee woman, it's my understanding, is Lori Hintz, who is not a big fan of Governor Burgum. Does that matter? Like at RNC meetings, are they talking to other states saying, hey, we don't like this guy? Is that a big problem for Burgum?
No, it's not. In the scheme of things, I mean, you'd like to have everybody supporting him, but he's not perfect. There isn't a perfect candidate out there. But no, to answer your question, Chad, I don't think that's really an issue. Back to our conversation before we started the show, I mean, I think the bigger problem for Doug is just breaking out of the pack. He's one of 9 candidates, including Trump. I think he's got to do something exceptional, whether Lori Hintz, the National Committee woman, or if Sandi Sanford wins, if they're talking things about Doug Burgum that they don't care for. I think it's a nothing burger.
They just don't have enough juice to influence.
Yeah, I think the one thing is if somebody like that, whether it's Sandi Sanford acting as the chair of Burgum's own party or the National Committee woman for his own party, if they get in the right media and they were to go to the media and say things, I think symbolically, I think that could hurt Burgum, because it's like, it feeds into the Doug Who narrative. Like, oh, not only is this guy from North Dakota and he's obscure, but his own state party doesn't like him or something like that. Especially because Burgum's taking on some of the culture war stuff, right?
Yeah.
And it remains to be seen whether or not Republican voters want that approach. Which I wrote about this morning in a column I submitted just before the show. I'm liking a lot of what he's saying. I'm liking that he's saying, listen, it's the responsibility, whatever may happen. A lot of these issues are issues for state legislatures. Yeah. The president of the United States needs to be focused on bigger picture issues than book bans and pronouns and some of this other stuff. And I agree with that. But I don't know how, he's gonna win the nomination based on a vote of the Republican base. And I don't know if that's what they want.
Yeah. No, I think you're right, Rob. I thought his answer at CNN about the abortion bill in North Dakota was spot on. That's essentially what the Supreme Court said. This is an issue for the states, and each state's going to address it. And he's speaking on a national platform, not at the state platform. So I thought the answer was well done.
I did like that CNN interview led off with them asking him about my column, which I
did too.
He seemed surprised about it. But he couldn't possibly have been more surprised than I was sitting at home like, whoa.
Rob, that sort of reminds me of how often a North Dakota United poll has been showing up in national publications. The one that showed Wayne Stenhjem up 59-10. which might have been one of the best things that happened to Burgum, because now the narrative is that was our poll that North Dakota United did that showed Stenjum up 49. I don't think the poll was wrong. I do think Burgum ran an exceptionally good campaign.
I think he just changed it. I mean, he was unknown. I mean, you got to remember, when that poll was run, almost nobody knew him. When they knew him, minds changed. So, I mean, that was in defense of the poll, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Bob, so what's going to happen? What's going to happen with the North Dakota GOP over the next couple of weeks? What happens if they elect Perrie Schafer? What happens if they elect Sandi Sanford? What does that mean for the future of the North Dakota GOP?
Well, and I'm gonna offer some counsel to some of these folks, because I'm retired. I feel like I'm in a position I can shoot my mouth off anytime I want, which I've been doing lately. But
yeah, I was gonna say, you wait until you were retired. I don't know that.
Yeah, that's true.
Some of us have made a fine living out of shooting our mouths off.
To answer your question, Chad, though, I think this debate, this process they're in, I mean, I think it is healthy. I think there's some learning. Campaigns are good for people. They learn some things. They get bruised. They might have an idea that they exposed to an idea that they hadn't considered before. So I think that's going to go on. But I think these conversations are going on just not with the three of us, but with others. And people want the party to get their act together, have rules that are fair at the district level. I think there are some recommendations that will be made at state party rule changes, whether it's how the platform is crafted, or whether we even need a platform. Some rules about, should a legislator serve as a district chair? We tried that once when I was chairman. Didn't go very well, but those are some things I think that are going to continue to percolate, where people will begin to understand that, hey, I might not agree with you about transgender issues, but you and I are in sync on K-12 education, healthcare, nursing homes, property taxes, and everything else. So you want to fight about the one issue, or should we get together on the others? So I think this is challenging. It's kind of ugly, but I think it's healthy, and I'm going to try and I guess the people that I know that are interested in are going to try and help it be a positive exercise in the end, and that some things do change, like these district rule changes that we're talking about.
One thing that and Bob, I guess maybe you could tell me how you feel about this. I have been envisioning if somebody like, if this faction that we've been talking about, I feel like there might be a situation where it's the dog catches the car, right? And now they're in charge. Now they're the establishment. Now what? And how are they going to react to it? Are they going to, because a lot of times you'll see that where somebody's running for and they have a lot of wild radical ideas, then they get elected. Yeah. I always think like Barack Obama saying he's going to shut down Guantanamo Bay, right? He campaigned on it and then he didn't do it. Certainly didn't do it for a long time, because it turns out that's a much more complicated issue to actually implement this policy than it is to talk about on the campaign trail. So I think there might be some of that going on. But one thing I'm really worried about, or I don't worry about, I guess one thing that's on my mind about it is what this may demonstrate about the necessity of the North Dakota Republican Party. Because if you have somebody who's chair, say it's Sandi Sanford, and she has a long history of being critical of the governor, Doug Burgum, maybe future president, I don't know. Or frankly, I mean, she was on social media calling for a primary challenger to Congressman Kelly Armstrong, right? I mean, she has been sharply critical. We already have a practice where we're seeing candidates skip the convention. Doug Burgum skipped the NDGOP convention. Kevin Kramer skipped the NDGOP convention. Why would these candidates continue to show up, right? I mean, part of me questioned why John Hoeven showed up to the last convention when there was a possibility that he was going to get booed and he was going to get mistreated. I worry that some of the currently elected Republicans are going to move away from the party because they don't need it. They can raise their own money. They can build their own networks. They don't really need the party. But then short term, that's what happens. But then long term, if the party can't raise money and doesn't have a good relationship with its own elected leaders, then what happens in terms of recruiting new Republicans and in the future finding new candidates and keeping this streak of 30 plus years that the NDGOP has been dominant. That's kind of where my mind's at. What do you think of all that?
Well, I think there's a real risk to that, Rob. I do, and I think because the elected officials, they're the ones that can raise the money, and the party doesn't work. I mean, I was treasurer for almost 4 years, chairman for another 2, raised all of the money for those 6 years for the most part. Well, Gary Emmett helped me when I was treasurer, but it's hard to raise money for a party. It's a lot easier if I'm raising money for Chad Oban because he's going to be a great senator from District 35. That's a lot easier than this. So elected officials raise money, and if they begin to see the party as being irrelevant because of some of the rules and the shenanigans that they see, they will abandon the party and it will become less relevant. And that's some of the conversation that needs to take place. In addition to that, back to Chad's point about state law, we need to, I think, revisit the North Dakota legislature as to how the law affects the private parties functioning, and whether there needs to be some law changes, both in terms of party organization as well as how the primary works. Now, there was a move afoot a year and a half ago about changing the order of the primary and the convention, which I think is just crazy. But we need to look at some of those law changes to see if it makes sense what we're doing and allowing people to go through the party exercise and then say you don't get the result and then you get through the primary anyways. I haven't come up with the right answer or the formula for that, but I think that's another part of the conversation that needs to take place after this next election, or this election next week.
Yeah, and people aren't going to leave the party in the sense of not running as Republican. They're going to leave the Republican Party structure and continue to.
I think like what you saw in Georgia with Brian Kemp, where the party is obviously Brian Kemp, not a favorite of Donald Trump's. His state political party controlled by Trump loyalists. He just set up his own network. He just set up his own PAC or whatever. He's recruiting his own candidates and raising his own money. That to me has been a model for what could happen here in North Dakota.
Yeah, for sure. And and one of the things I think was discussed last session is sort of indicating in the primary ballot who's the endorsed candidate of the political party and who's not the endorsed candidate. I don't like that idea at all, because you might have a situation where, again, a small faction of one party or the other takes things over and endorses a bunch of not so great candidates.
I would feel a lot more comfortable with the convention endorsements being more prominent if I could trust the process that produced those endorsements. And that's the problem we've been talking about, where there's shenanigans all over the place, where people withholding bylaws, people packing rooms, some people get in the room, some people get locked out. It's not a process. The convention endorsement process is not one that I trust. And frankly, Republicans shouldn't be happy about it, because if you start looking at some of the candidates endorsed, some of them are wildly out of step with where I would argue that the larger North Dakota electorate is. I mean, you look at you look at that last state convention where Rick Becker almost beat John Hoeven, and then coming in you get to the general election, Rick Becker comes in a distant third behind even the Democratic candidate. So, there's a disconnect there that ought to worry Republicans. Last word to you, Bob.
Well, I think you're right, Rob. I mean, I think those kinds of issues, those kinds of gamesmanship stunts that are occurring at the district level, that's exactly why people are frustrated, and that's why we have to have, I think, and I'll just tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to send an email into the state committee. I'm going to make some proposed ideas, some rule changes, including a set of uniform bylaws, so that they can address some of this stuff, because that is the problem. And I told Perrie this a year and a half ago. I said, part of the problem we have in the party is we have a sloppy process at the local level that people don't trust anymore.
And people are taking advantage of that sloppiness. I mean, I would argue somebody like Jared Hendricks, who's been kind of one of the takes advantage of that sloppy process. And it's ridiculous. You go to the Minot area and you walk in the room and you've got districts in different corners of a big room, and they have the bylaws are different. Like, they're not playing by this. They're in the same room in the same party, but depending on which corner of the room you're in, they're playing by different rules. That's got to. We can have a debate about what the bylaws should be.
Yeah,
but once the bylaws are established, that's it. Those are the bylaws, and they're for everybody. All right, we got to go. Bob, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Maybe
Thanks,
we'll have
Bob.
you on. Maybe we'll have you on again after all the dust settles and talk about it some more.
I'd love to talk about it some more. Good to see both of you.
Hi there, my name is James Wallner. I produce and host the podcast Dakota Spotlight, a true crime podcast that tackles historical and unsolved crimes in the upper Midwest. Follow along with me as we search for a missing girl, attempt to solve a 45-year-old murder, and much, much more. That's Dakota Spotlight Podcast, anywhere you get your podcasts, or at inforum.com/podcasts.
Okay, we just wrapped up with Bob Harms, a discussion of what's going on in the North Dakota Republican Party. And as promised, I said there are probably the only two political stories in our state right now are Doug Burgum running for president and what's happening in his political party simultaneously, where his party may come under the leadership of some people who don't like him very much. So that's all very interesting. But we're going to switch. We're going to focus on Doug Burgum now. And here to talk with me a little bit about that is, well, someone who used to work for him in multiple capacities. I'll let him describe that. But he's also a state senator from District 35, just finished his first legislative session. Sean Cleary, how are you doing, sir?
Good, Rob. Thanks for having me on, and good to see you too, Chad.
Good to see you too. Sean told me he came back because he heard I was co-hosting and he wanted to be part of the Oban bump.
Yeah, that's right. I guess allegedly. Sean, tell us your history with Doug Burgum. Help us. And the funny thing is, I've been kind of a little bit when he was giving his speech in Fargo. Yeah, people texted me like, "Oh, this is so boring. We've all heard this speech before." Blah blah blah. And my reaction was, "Well, yeah, we have. We're from North Dakota. There are millions of people across the country who don't know who this guy is." And yeah, he's rehashing some old territory because they need to be introduced to him. I thought it was a good speech overall. Other than I get anyway, you can go read my column about that. We don't need to rehash it here. Sean, tell us a little bit about this guy who's running for president.
So my relationship with Doug Burgum started when I moved home to work for him in 2018, and then through the 2019 legislative session, and have a tremendous amount of respect for him. You know, you mentioned it, and we've heard the story and in North Dakota over the last couple of decades, and then now in the political sphere, you know, folks have gotten to know the story of Doug Burgum, but it is an incredible one. And so I think one that warrants, it might be repetitive for us, but I think one that I think he's excited to tell with the folks down in Iowa and the rest of the country. So, it was exciting to be at the announcement on Wednesday. A lot of great energy in the room, and I think hit on a lot of points that are really important to a lot of Americans. And so I'm excited to see him take that message across the country here over the next couple months.
So, Sean, you said you're in the room, and I mean, even as somebody who's left of center, I mean, it's exciting to see a North Dakotan running for president, and frankly, I'd take Doug Burgum over Donald Trump any day of the week from where I'm sitting. I mean, don't agree with him on all things or most things, but certainly better than the former president. What was it like being in the room? I mean, it's a presidential announcement. It looked really well done from a production point of view. What was your takeaway from actually being in the room when he announced for president?
It was an incredible day. A lot of positive energy. I've never been to a presidential announcement before, but it felt like just about everything I'd expect one to be. And, a lot of people there, well, everyone there who was there because they believe in Doug and the message that he has and that he's going to bring to this campaign. And so the energy was fantastic. And I think a really great way to start the campaign as he, as it grows and he gets to share that with people across the country. So, yeah, it checked all the boxes of what I guess I thought a presidential announcement would be. And I thought it was a great way to get things going.
A theme about Doug Burgum, and we talked about this a little bit in the last segment where there was that famous poll from North Dakota United. And Chad, don't make that face at me as defending the poll. The poll was accurate. Yeah. It's a credit to Doug Burgum that he turned those numbers around. But famously he was down, was it 59 to 10%?
59 to 10.
And turned that around and beat Wayne Stenjum. So I mean, I think that's kind of the early thing is he surprises people. And so as we move into, this sort of national political dynamic where, the initial reaction to him is Doug who, Doug's a blank spot on the nation's imagination. Some of these sort of derisive. What about Doug Burgum's going to surprise a national audience, Sean?
Well, I would say no other candidate in the race has a story and a vision like Doug Burgum. He, we all know it well by now, but he grew up in Arthur. He invested in Great Plains Software, became the CEO, and sold that to Microsoft. And he's done, even outside of Great Plains and Microsoft, incredible things in the world of business, and has done that in North Dakota. It's I try not to get too overwhelmed by it, but it's truly a unique thing. There's not a lot else like it, and not a lot of other people like him. And so you take that and you combine that with the vision and the energy he brings to the political sphere in a way that we don't really see from a lot of other candidates. Some of them might have this sort of vision or these ideas, but he, in my mind, is sort of the complete package of this. He has the story, he has the focus on the right sort of issues. And so to your point, name recognition nationally, I'm sure is a little low right now, but I think as folks get to know Doug Burgum, they'll like him. And so he's an incredibly competitive guy, and I know he'll devote 110% to everything he does in this campaign. So that's why I'm excited to see it over the next couple months, is because I know whether it's the messaging, whether it's him personally going voter to voter in some of these early states, I just know the story he's able to tell and the vision he's going to show, I think will really resonate with voters as he's making that case for why he should be the next president of the United States.
Well, I think the other thing that obviously Governor Burgum has that maybe some of the other candidates don't have is personal wealth. If it's a billion, Rob, or if it's under billionaire, non-billionaire, it's significant. He's proven that he's more than willing to spend his own resources to break through. I saw a report in the Forum this morning, 1.5 million already reserved in Iowa, 842 reserved in New Hampshire. Do you think, just being up on TV and with sort of, he said a positive message, I worry about in this sort of national sphere where he's at zero and he's got to knock down Trump, DeSantis, Scott, all these different people. Do you think that, just advertising alone is going to be enough? Like, how does he tell that story? How does he get the story that clearly is inspiring to you and other North Dakotans? How does he actually get that in front of people? Because
I think Doug's ability to tell his story in person, obviously having that sort of money helps when you have to get the message out. You're starting from next to zero on the national profile. But, I know he's going to put the work in going from voter to voter in these early states. And then, you combine that with the messaging and the fundraising, and that's an important part of any campaign. So I don't think it's as simple as, he's able to self-fund and that's going to be his only mechanism to boost this. I think he's going to put the work in. And like I said, I think we know, he has that material, that story to work with. And I think, doing that on a personal basis and then, combining that with the messaging, I think that the combination of those things will really help to get the story out there and help to get some momentum going in this race.
I think the advertising will help because, again, he's starting at zero. His name recognition is zero. His spot in the poll, except for one CNN poll from mid-May, he's polling at zero. So he has nowhere to go but up. And the first place to start is probably television, just so people say, oh, I've heard that name before. But it is going to be tough. And also, I think the other big focus is he's got to get 40,000 donations. I mean, I don't know if you guys agree, but I think he's got to make the debate stage in August. If he's not on that debate stage, I think people are going to say, why should we take this guy from North Dakota seriously? Although I think for the next, maybe week or so, he is going to benefit somewhat from the Doug Who thing. It's a novelty to have somebody from North Dakota running for president. And people might want to be derisive about that or laugh about that, but it is earning him some media. It is earning him some attention that he might not have otherwise got if he was, a sort of a nationally known but maybe kind of backbencher congressman, running a long shot for presidency. There's a different dynamic to that, I would argue, to being from North Dakota.
I would agree, and it's a situation where if folks don't know about him and then they learn about him, there's plenty to learn, and we're coming right out of a legislative session where we got a lot done, a lot that I think he'll be able to tell voters about. The biggest tax cut in state history. Even the things where him and I didn't necessarily always agree on. I think it was a tremendous session for the governor, and I think that, along with his personal history, when folks find out about that, it's he's an impressive guy. And then you combine that, not just looking in the past, and I think the governor is good at talking about this. So we're not just talking about the past, we're talking about the future. And there's very few people I've seen communicate their vision for what they want the future of our state and our country to look like as clearly and as effectively as Doug Burgum. And so I think I'm optimistic that will resonate with voters, and I guess we'll see here over the next couple months.
Yeah, I will tell you, I was a bit underwhelmed by sort of what I saw on social media in terms of a level of enthusiasm. I went to Twitter and looked at what Senator Scott got when he announced compared to Burgum, compared to some of this next tier, and it wasn't a lot. I mean, we've seen more enthusiasm for people announcing for state senate in the state at times than sort of the bump he got in enthusiasm. So I worry that there's a bit of an enthusiasm gap for him, that you just didn't see maybe some of the excitement that was in the room translate outside. I mean, news stories where nobody was commenting, and I know that's not an end all, but that does show sort of the level of interest in the campaign. Rob, you brought up how do you get on the debate stage? And I think you can do that you can buy your way to 40,000 donors. You can buy yourself to 1%. But I think that first debate is going to be super, super important for him. And so my question for you, Sean, is he gets on the debate stage and he's up there with DeSantis and Trump and all these people.
Well, so Trump may not participate. So Trump might not be there, but.
Yeah, he might be in jail. Maybe not that quickly. How does Burgum break through in that stage when it's 10 candidates, all of whom are trying to have their moment? Can he do it just by being the common sense guy? Do you think there's a lane for that? And how does he break through?
Well, I certainly do think there's a lane for it. And, common sense, when there's not an abundance of it, I would say is something that makes him fairly unique. And whether or not that resonates with primary voters, I guess we'll see over the next couple months. But what I like about Doug is there's this authenticity in that he's focused on these issues, things that are important to us in North Dakota, but to people broadly, focus on these pocketbook issues of the economy, on our energy sector, on the national security issues we're facing. And yeah, when we're talking about these things on the debate stage, I think the focus on those combined with the record of achievement that he'll be able to bring to that in both private and in public life, it's not something that's necessarily tailor-made to go viral for reasons why things go viral on Twitter, which I'd say is sometimes not what you'd want to see anyway from an elected official. But the governor said it, and I think I agree that there are a large chunk of the population who want someone who's a capable leader, who has a vision for the future and isn't necessarily trying to, I don't know, whatever the flavor of the week is for what gets big hits on cable news. And that's something I respect about him. And I think that there is going to be an appreciation for on the campaign trail too.
I think there's kind of the problem here is that in our hearts, we want somebody who can go to the campaign trail and credibly say, I was an effective governor. I govern. I am an accomplished person. I am an authentic person. And our hearts say that should resonate with the electorate. Our brains say, well, he's not trending on Twitter. And to trend on Twitter, he's got to do something crazy to break through, which was kind of my criticism. And he was asked about that during a CNN interview. My thing was he's got to do something. And I wasn't advocating for him to do something crazy. I think there is a way that he can be aggressive and get attention without being a bully. I think he can contrast himself, for instance, with Donald Trump and say, listen, I built a multi-billion-dollar company in North Dakota almost from scratch. And I did it without my daddy putting a silver spoon in my mouth.
And without being indicted several times.
I'm not a criminal, right? I'm not, some of these other things that are going on. Although, frankly, and this is the world we're living in, I worry that the indictments of Donald Trump are going to help him in this primary process. And so that's, I mean, I guess that's the conundrum for Doug Burgum, is it's like, he's a good man running at a time where the electorate may not want that. Mm-hmm. I don't know how he bridges that gap, Sean.
Well,
Sean's answer is, I don't know either.
I don't know either, but I do believe in the American people's ability to make distinctions. And I know that electoral politics, there can be frustrations with that, with some of the things we navigate in how political debates happen now. But I do appreciate his focus on these issues and on showing his vision. And I do think there's a lane for that. And, Iowa's not too far away, but he does have a few months here to make that case. And it's not something that we're going to flip the switch and it's going to happen overnight. But I truly believe we're going to see some momentum here as word gets out and as he, puts the time and puts the resources into building the message. And I do think there's a lane there for that.
So, Sean, one of the things that I've been thinking about since it started to trickle out that the governor was going to be making this run is, what does it mean for North Dakota politics? What does it mean for the governor's race? I mean, if he doesn't make a determination on the governor's race until after Iowa, does that create some sort of space or some sort of oxygen for the Rick Beckers of the world when there's not an alternative in the state? I mean, we've seen Rick Becker. He was in a story about corporate cronyism. He's now pushing the property tax elimination. He went after our good friend Rob Port in the paper yesterday, I believe.
He did? I missed it.
Yeah. Oh. Well, you should start reading your employer's newspaper periodically.
I don't read the letters that closely.
I think it was in the Forum. Maybe it's in the Trib. But are you at all concerned that if Doug stays in this presidential race, eventually North Dakotans will be like, we'd like to have a governor sort of focused on our state, and then he decides to run and there's some blowback, or he doesn't decide to run and there's not enough time for the Kelly Armstrongs or those kind of people to get into the race. What do you think the timeline is here where he has to make a decision on the governor's race to make sure that something bad doesn't happen for what's coming in behind him?
Well, Chad, I'd start by saying it sounds like you pay just about as close attention to Rick Becker as anybody in the state, because I've missed those things here over the last couple of weeks. But I don't know the legal deadline for when the governor would have to make the decision on whether he is going to continue on with the presidential race or, run for re-election as governor. And, frankly, I'd like to see him as the next president of the United States. And if that's not the case, I would love it if he ran for governor again. I don't know, to what extent he's given that thought either way. But to your point, if he chooses not to, and, I think we have a while until that happens, I think there's going to be significant interest, in the governor's race and to maybe some other spots that open up. But I don't see any particular issue with, this year as we navigate these first couple months of the campaign. Sure, there'll be some speculation and folks will talk about it because that's what folks like to do. But I think when we get a clearer image of what next year looks like, I think, it'll be exciting like all elections are. But I don't see any major issues with it. And I either hope he's president or he's back in North Dakota as our governor. But either way, I think we'll have time to navigate that.
I don't think that's been the other big speculation. I was on a part of a Prairie Public discussion about, and that was something that came up, was like, well, he probably really wants to be a cabinet. And that's been the other kind of dismissive, that he doesn't really want to be president. He wants to be cabinet. I got to tell you, everything I've learned about Doug Burgum since I really got introduced to him during that 2016 run, this guy doesn't play for second place. I don't think he wants the Pete Buttigieg trajectory where he runs and then takes a cabinet position, which is not saying that's not me slamming Pete Buttigieg. I don't think that's the trajectory he wants. I think he runs, and if he flames out, then I think he comes back to North Dakota and he does something here, probably run for a third term as governor. I just don't see that for him. Also, if it's the Trump administration, who wants to be a cabinet official in the Trump administration? You look at how well that worked out for all the other people Doug Mattis, Rex Tiller, all these people who were in his administration who got burned by it financially and professionally and ethically. I just don't see him signing up for that. But I don't know. I mean,
and Rob, I would say another thing that's the difference between Doug Burgum and Mayor Pete. I mean, Mayor Pete's in his 40s, right? I mean, why would Doug Burgum want to go and be the transportation secretary or something like that as sort of I mean, it's not like he's going to run for president. I shouldn't say that with the age of our two leading candidates, but yeah, I can't see him wanting to be a cabinet official either. After this is done.
I think your guys' opinion on that is pretty accurate. From everything I've got to know about Doug over the last couple of years, he does things because he truly believes in it, and I think he truly wants to be president. He wouldn't be running if it was just to be cabinet secretary. Frankly, he'd have the resume to do that already. So I think he's in it to win it, and I think he's going to bring that energy to the campaign trail.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. And Chad, to your point about, what does it mean for North Dakota politics? I think there's a long enough timeline to account for that, because I think that August debate, after it, if he doesn't make the stage, I don't see how his presidential campaign goes too much further. I don't know how he builds momentum at that point. If he is on the stage and he makes a splash and he gets going, well, then I think we can start having the conversation. Okay, he's going to stay in this race. Who's going to run for governor? And then you might see, here's some of the other people, whether it's a Rick Becker, but I think some people in the non-Becker camp would probably be a little more circumspect and maybe a little more, give the governor a little more space than a Rick Becker will. And I also don't, I think Rick Becker kind of got exposed as a paper tiger last cycle. I mean, he may be very, very good at conventions and stuff, and kind of getting that. He proved he can't win on the statewide ballot. He can't. And again, this is not me slamming the Democrat, but he is supposed to be the manifestation of authentic Republicanism, and he takes distant third behind a Democrat and John Hoeven. I just don't think he's got the juice, which doesn't necessarily matter when you've got an ego as ponderous as his, but.
Yeah, I was going to say, who really loves this segment that I brought us into is Rick Becker right now.
Because we're all talking about him, which is his favorite thing in the entire world. I should have known he was going to write a letter. When I wrote that column, I knew he was going to respond. I can even imagine it in my mind what he responded, and it was like how it's okay for him to take government subsidies because they were available, but it's not okay for anybody else to take them because limited government or something. I don't know.
You're right. The politicians passed the bad laws. It's not his fault that he took advantage of them.
Which ignores the fact that he was literally a politician not that long ago. But all right. Okay, enough Rick Becker.
I would say, as far as Doug's concerned, in the world we live in and in the legislature, we have a session where people have a lot of different opinions on what he's doing and not doing. And I guess you can put myself in there too. But at the end of the day, his tenure so far as governor, he's been incredibly popular with a broad sector of our state with the way that
consistently, I consistently polls among the most popular governors in the country, Republican and Democrat.
And it seemed like the other day when he announced, Democrats in our state could hardly find a bad thing to say about him. And,
there was a press release from the party that wasn't so hot, but actual elected Democrats, Josh Moshe, for instance, had a very nice.
They are contrasting him with Donald Trump guys, so let's take it a little bit.
That is why Donald Trump has lowered the bar in a lot of ways. Let me ask you about this, Sean, because this is something that's starting to come up. Is Doug saying he wants to move past the culture wars and focus on other things, and a fair question to ask him about that is, well, what about this legislative session we just came through where you signed a book ban into law and you signed a pronoun bill into law and some of these other bills that he signed? You were a member of that legislature. How does he, and I think you were very much somebody who wasn't in favor of a lot of those sort of culture war bills. How does he sort of navigate that?
I would say on those issues, it's something that they are issues that voters want to see addressed. I think there are concerns when parents have, concerns about what's going on in their school, or if there's other things that need to be addressed. But again, I think Doug's a practical guy, and I think he wants to empower people to make decisions that are best for them and their families. And so when it comes to these culture war things, I don't want to speak for the governor, but when I've seen him, how he approaches these things is he wants to empower people to be able to make the best decisions, to make sure their rights are respected, and that they can live a life where, they're able to feel safe and feel safe for what their kids are doing and be able to succeed. And so I feel like I'm in a pretty similar camp. I don't think we should have big government dictating to people every minutia of their private lives and their private values. And so, yeah, these things are important to voters. And I think it's something that he's going to have to talk about during the campaign, but especially Republicans, I think we need to get away from this idea that government can solve every little issue that we run into in our lives. And I think that's what part of what the governor's perspective is when he has to navigate some of these issues. And frankly, it's one I share too.
And I think the bills that he signed are going to be less problematic for him getting the GOP nomination than the ones he vetoed. Vetoing the transgender athletes bill session before last, vetoing the school choice bill, which, these are things that I support. Vetoing the mask ban on mask mandates. There's some things that he vetoed because there was another alternative that was a better option. I'm not so sure that many of the people that are going to be voting in the primary in Iowa and New Hampshire are going to see that difference, right? And so I think that those things are going to come up throughout this primary season, and he's going to have an answer for the far right on why he vetoed some of those things.
Frankly, what's been unsaid too is his relationship with Bill Gates. Right. Where, and again, I think I don't agree with Bill Gates on a lot of things, but I think he's an admirable person. I don't think he's the conspiratorial figure that he's often made out to be. But there is a not small faction of the Republican base who hate that guy. And Doug Burgum, he made a business deal with him. He worked for him. He's taken not small campaign contributions from him in the past. That stuff like that's going to be an issue for him.
And I think that him having the blank slate right now nationally makes it even more important that he spends resources and gets out there and defines himself before others start defining him. Because I think if nobody knows the left can define him a certain way, the right can define him a certain way, he needs to figure out how to define himself in the national narrative.
Well, I think we're going to put a pin in it there. Sean, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
thanks, Sean.
Yeah, take care.
Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.